Hey guys, welcome back again to the drifting series. I'm Denny. This is my channel, Float Fish Adventure. If you're new, this video is part of a larger series all about covering the different aspects of drift fishing from the kayak. I have primarily catfish in mind here, specifically with this series, but a lot of the topics and tactics can be ported over to fishing for other fish. Anyway, this is video 3. The first couple of videos we talked about your basic strategy and about location, which is one of the key components to successful fishing in general, not only just drift fishing, but we talked about how it applies to drift fishing and how to keep it in your mind while you're on the water setting up your drift patterns. So location, one of the key factors, very, very important, probably one of the biggest, most important factors in my opinion, because like my man Buck Perry always said, you can't catch them fishing where they ain't. So we covered that. The next thing is presentation, which is also very important. Once you get to where the fish are, the right location, the right piece of structure, you have to present the bait in a way that they want. So presentation is divided into, in my opinion, the two major components. And those two components are depth control and speed control. And today we're going to talk a little bit about depth control. Generally speaking, active fish on the bottom are the easiest to catch. So if you're going to play the odds, those are the fish you want to target. There are some times when fish are active, suspended in the water column, but they're more difficult to target. And more often than not, when you see fish that are suspended in the water column, they're in a dormant state. So it's kind of a waste of time to go after them. So targeting fish on the bottom, it's the easiest way to present your baits, and the fish that you find there are the most likely fish to be willing to take a bait. So it's win-win. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go in depth a little bit about depth control and how to maintain the right depth control while you're drifting for catfish. So let's get on with it. So you're probably thinking about now that if we're going to target fish on the bottom, then controlling our depth is probably a pretty straightforward affair, and that's for the most part true. There are a couple little finer points though that I want to mention, and then we'll talk about the best techniques to present your baits, and then touch on the most appropriate rigs to accomplish those techniques. So first thing, even though we want to target fish on the bottom, we don't want our baits lying right on the bottom. Number one, a lot of times you have silt on the bottom, and your bait can just be hard to find when it's down right on the bottom in the silt, or in sometimes there's a sort of a muck line on the bottom. So we want to be above that, just to make our baits easier to find. Secondly, and more importantly, little fish root around on the bottom looking for scraps to eat. We're not targeting those fish. We want to target the bigger fish, and the bigger fish are predators. They're expecting to hunt and kill the food they're going to eat. So when we're drifting a piece of cut bait near the bottom, what we want to do is try and present the illusion that that is a wounded bait fish that is still alive, that is struggling, and that's an easy opportunity for food for a big predator. So keeping our bait up off the bottom a bit is really key for getting more fish and targeting bigger fish. So you really have your choice between two techniques here. That is suspending, where you're going to drop your bait straight down and then lift it up off the bottom a bit and drift with the bait suspended straight down, or dragging, which is where you're going to cast way back and drag along the bottom some distance behind you. The primary deciding factor between which is going to be the best technique to use really is the bottom features. If you're on a section with a uniform bottom where the contour doesn't change much, you're drifting a flat or the inside of a channel edge, on the bottom of the channel or on the top of the channel where it's constant depth, suspend fishing is really an excellent tactic. Suspend fishing is arguably the best way to put your bait exactly where you want it off the bottom. You can drop your bait straight down, let it hit the bottom, and then reel up exactly how far you want to get it up off the bottom, whether it's tight to the bottom like only a foot if you're chasing channel cats, or maybe a little higher, like closer to 3 foot if you're chasing blue cats. Excellent technique if the bottom contour is consistent. If you got more variance where the bottom is changing up and down, bumps and dips, a suspend rig really is not the best choice because your bait is going to be out of position a lot. When you're going, you might be in position on the hump, and then you go down the hump goes down, you're more depth, and if you're not constantly adjusting, then your bait's going to be too high off the bottom, or it's going to be dragging on the bottom out of position. So that's really the primary consideration for when it would be good to suspend. You have two basic rigs for suspending. You have a knocker rig, right, which is essentially an egg sinker that's all the way down to the hook, and that puts your bait exactly where you want it. This is good if you've got some cover or debris on the bottom, because it's easier to get loose if it snags up, because you can sort of knock it around and knock it free. If you have a lot of chop on top, you got some wind and wave action going on and you're doing some bouncing, this is not so good, because this will transmit all of that bouncing to your weight exactly. In that case, you're better off with like a slip sinker rig, where your main line goes to the sinker to a swivel, and then you have a leader tied there, so your weight would be here, and then this would be more free-flowing. And the more chop you have on top, the longer you want your leader to be, so you get some buffer. You just have to keep in mind how long it is, because if you drop your sinker down to the bottom, you have to reel up the length of this and then some to get the bait actually where you want it, okay? So if the bottom contour is changing, you're doing some, you're drifting over a hump, or a slow, gradual, decline or incline, in that case, dragging is going to be a lot better. And if you're going to drag and you still want to keep that bait up off the bottom, the single best rig for that is, without question, the Santee Cooper rig. The Santee Cooper rig is basically a slip sinker rig, but it's got a float, a peg float in it, right? So you've got your sinker on your main line. I use a sinker slide usually, and then you've got a section of leader, and then the peg float, which will lift your bait up off the bottom, right? And then you play with the length to get it adjusted to where you want it. So the float keeps your bait from just dragging along the bottom while you're drifting. Without question, that's the best rig if you're going to do any dragging and you still want to keep your bait up off the bottom, which we do. Possible exceptions to that would be rocky bottom, clear water. Just because sometimes you need a little subtler presentation when you've got a lot of clear water. And if you've got a rocky bottom, you don't have any silt. Dragging a rig like the Santee Cooper is going to allow you to keep your bait in position, because that weight's always going to be moving along the bottom. As you go up and over and back down humps, any little ledges or drop-offs, you want to make sure that you have your line out far enough behind you that even sudden changes in depth, your sinker is going to be able to slide down and keep contact with the bottom. That's really the main key with dragging. So I put together sort of a basic starter chart of this is sort of my rules of thumb, right? And this is not meant to be exhaustive or complete, covering every possible scenario, but sort of my starting point for, am I going to suspend? Am I going to drag? Which rig am I going to use? So I have this chart. I put it together. You can take a look at it. Feel free to use it. Feel free not to use it. It's my starting point. So like I said at the start, the upshot of targeting fish on the bottom is that it makes depth control a little easier, on top of the fact that those are the fish that we generally want to target anyway, because they're the easiest ones to catch. So that's going to cover depth control. Hopefully this gave you some things to think about, and a good place to start for when you want to get out on the water and decide which tactic you want to employ based on where exactly you're going to be trying to drift. So in the next video, we're going to tackle speed control, making sure we keep our speed exactly where we want to. And that's a little more difficult, obviously, in a kayak. So that's next time. Until then, paddle up. Let's go looking for a fight.